Good morning and welcome to the Face of Steel here in the Magna Science Adventure Centre in the former Templeborough Steelworks in Rotherham. We're here for Big Ideas Live, a new format for Sky News that we hope will help us to explore big issues, big themes, big ideas across the agenda for the UK today. On Ian King Live, we're kicking off our coverage, exploring the challenges facing the economy as we come out of the pandemic. Is Boris Johnson's promise of a high-wage, high-skills economy deliverable? And what would it mean for business? And are the problems that we're seeing in the country's supply chains a symptom of short-term worker shortages, or are we in for a longer ride? I'll be discussing that with a panel taken from across British business, and I'll be introducing them in a moment. I'd also like to invite you to ask questions or comment during our day using the hashtag #BigIdeasLive. But first, a feature of Big Ideas Live will be our Sky News experts. Later, we'll hear from our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, and my colleagues Samantha Washington and Trevor Phillips. But first, our business correspondent, Helen Ann Smith, is here to set the scene for our discussion. Helen Ann.
Thanks, Ian. Good morning, everyone. So what's happened in the jobs market over the last 18 months is perhaps one of the greatest curiosities of this crisis. Normally, at times of recession, we see unemployment spiking, we see vacancies falling right down. Although unemployment has been kept relatively in check, vacancies have actually behaved in entirely the opposite way to what we might have expected. Just this morning, we heard vacancies in September up record highs again, over 1.1 million. And although that might seem like good news on the surface for workers, the reality might be a bit more nuanced, and there's big challenges for business about how to realign to the new reality post-pandemic. So first of all, have a look at this. What we're plotting here is some of the key sectors that are driving that big growth in vacancies. Up there at the top, transport and logistics. We've heard so much about it, haven't we? Up 300% job adverts there on what they were pre-pandemic. But problems in other sectors too, manufacturing, construction, even travel and tourism, surprising perhaps given the problems that that sector has faced. However, that's not the case in all sectors across the economy. Have a look at this. What we've plotted here is some sectors where job vacancies are actually down on what they were before the pandemic. Some of this might not be that surprising. For example, sales, we know retail has had some problems, but some sectors here are a little bit surprising. Jobs down in energy, jobs down in legal, graduate jobs down as well. And what this is essentially showing us is that there's a realignment going to be happening in the economy. We know, for example, don't we, that there are going to be fewer jobs in places, for example, like city centre sandwich shops, more jobs in places like warehouses. It may be a bit too soon to see some of these things really playing out in the data, but some of the early signs are certainly interesting. Now, the question for many of us is not just where are the jobs, but actually where are the workers to fill all of these vacancies? And it's quite interesting. They might not necessarily always be in the right places. So what we've done here is charting the number of unemployed and furloughed people as of July against the number of regions of the country. So essentially, the higher up they are on this graph, the more unemployed and furloughed people there were as of July, the further along they are, the greater growth in vacancies that those sectors have seen. What this essentially shows is there's different problems in different regions. London, for example, right up there at the top, absolutely the worst place to be in the country right now if you're a worker. By far the highest number of people potentially looking for work, the fewest vacancies. Over at the other side, different problems. The North East, the largest number of vacancies there. Yorkshire and the Humber, where we are today, higher vacancies and comparatively fewer people looking for those jobs. So not only might the workers not be in the right places, but they might not also be at the right skill level. Have a look at this. There is a slight correlation between the number of vacancies in certain sectors and the average earnings in those sectors. So over at this side, hospitality, many more vacancies, lower pay on average. Over there on the other end, finance. Worth saying anecdotally, transport up there, the big vacancies driver. Anecdotally, we do know that some of the jobs that do exist are in those lower paying driving jobs as opposed to the managerial jobs as well. And look, as we go forward over the coming years and the coming decades, there will be other new challenges for businesses as well. I want to leave you with this. One of the challenges we may all face is automation. What this essentially shows is that there is a direct correlation, anecdotally, between how likely a sector was to furlough its workers in the recent crisis and how at risk that sector might be from automation. So look, up here at the top, food and tourism, retail, construction to a degree as well, highly likely to have furloughed their workers during this crisis, much more at risk of automation. Over here on the opposite end, media, scientific, IT. Of course, it won't go unnoticed that these tend to be the higher paying careers as well, potentially slightly lower paying, over there. So big questions for businesses, not just about how these factors all collide, are we creating a more vulnerable group of workers going forward, but crucially also how business is going to rise to this challenge and will we be able to find the workers that are needed. Thank you. Ian.
Thanks, Helen. Time now to introduce you to my panel of experts. On my far right is Lord Williamson, the chairman of COBRA, founder of COBRA, and also president of the CBI. On my immediate right, Alvina Malik. She's chief executive and co-founder of 1 Billion Mentors, which pairs young people with mentors in industry. On my immediate left is Carl Ennis. He's chief executive of Siemens here in the UK and also CEO of Siemens Smart Infrastructure. And on my far left is Clive Chesser. He's Chief Executive of Punch Pubs & Co. And we also have expertise in our audience today from the regional business community, from local business owners, and hopefully one or two business leaders of the future. Now, before we get on to our panel discussion, we're going to touch on a very live piece of news, something that's happened just around the corner from here during the last 24 hours, which is that the Liberty Steel business has just been told it's receiving a £50 million cash injection from its owner. And I'm very pleased to say we have Chris Williamson in the audience. He's branch secretary of the community trade unit at Liberty Steel's Rotherham plant. Chris, welcome to you. You must be absolutely delighted.
Fantastic news. It's great relief. It's been harrowing for the last few months, but it's great peace of mind to get that funding in place that later on.
I mean, obviously, steel production is an energy-intensive business. Energy bills at the wholesale level and at the retail level are going through the roof right now. Do you worry that that money is going to be consumed fairly rapidly?
If Boris is true to his word with his rhetoric this morning, hopefully we'll get some movement with that. It is a deep concern. We've had concerns around energy for the last 30 years, around levelling up with the rest of Europe. But obviously this crisis has escalated it.
All right. Chris, great pleasure to have you here with us today. Thanks very much for joining us. On we go then. And Lord Billy, I'm going to start with you. We heard from Boris Johnson last week. He clearly wants to turn the UK into a high-wage economy. But it seems to me, economic orthodoxy is that high wages follow an improvement in productivity. Boris Johnson, it feels like he's trying to put the cart before the horse.
We all want a high wage, high skills, high investment, and high productivity. So you can say you want high wages, but unless you have all the other things, it's going to lead to inflation. So we've got to take this opportunity now. We all want those high wages, but invest in skills. Now is the time. Those graphs that we've just seen, the disintermediation that's going to take place in the future, regardless of the pandemic, regardless of the crises we're facing now, that's staring us in the face. So the CBI, we've calculated, over the next decade, businesses will have to invest £130 billion in reskilling. So what the government's got to do is right now, things like the Kickstart scheme, fantastic scheme to get young people, 16 to 24-year-olds, into work. We said, please extend that. Beyond December, they've listened, they're going to extend it. Things like the lifelong learning account. What a great initiative. So people at any age in their lives have access to money to be able to retrain. The apprenticeship levy, good idea, not working. It needs to be far more flexible. So if you do all those things, you can reskill. And our universities, the best in the world along with America. I'm proud to be Chancellor at the University of Birmingham, top 100 university in the world, along with Siemens, with Carl and his team, with a brand new AI-enabled campus in Dubai, state-of-the-art, 5,000 students. That's global Britain in action. So we can do it, we're proving it, let's invest in it. Once you have that investment, once you have the skills, then you get the high wages and you have the productivity, then you get growth. That growth delivers jobs. The jobs pay the taxes pay for the public services and pay down the debt, the £400 billion that we're so grateful as business the government has given. That's why unemployment, the figures that have come out today, at only 4.5%. Before the pandemic, were the lowest in the 70s at 3.5%. People were expecting unemployment to go up to 10%. If you remember, after the financial crisis, unemployment went up to over 9%. And we've saved that now, thanks to the government help, including the furlough scheme. Now it's a very fragile recovery. And this is where government mustn't give up now. This is where government's got to work with business to really support this fragile recovery so we can have that growth.
Okay, well, Kyle, obviously you invest an awful lot in skills and in equipping the workforce for the modern economy.
Yep.
To what extent was that work blown off course by the pandemic?
So actually we were quite lucky in that much of what we do was for supporting national infrastructure, keeping the trains running, keeping the energy systems up and running, keeping medical equipment running. So actually we were able to employ pretty much throughout. Many people continuing to do what they were doing at the face of work, and a lot of our office people, adopted technology and were able to work from home. So I think we were able to survive that skill topic. If I just pick up on the other topic that Karen, I completely agree with all of that. And one of the ways you address productivity is by deploying technology. And it was really interesting listening to it was Helen Ann as her introduction. She talks about risk of automation. And actually that for me speaks volumes, right? There is no risk from automation. There is a risk from not automating, because if we don't, others will. The thing about global Britain is that means we're on a global stage. We have to be competitive globally. And I truly believe if we don't adopt automation, new technologies in all industrial areas, then we will be missing one of the biggest levers to drive that productivity up. That's just the reality.
It is quite a terrifying idea, though, Alvin, to a lot of people, isn't it? The thought that they may lose their job to AI, to automation. I mean, how do you sell that to a sceptical public?
Well, I think as Clive was saying, automation is reality and we need to embrace it. And I think there is a huge amount to do in terms of investing in skills. One of the things, Lord Bellamy, that we need to do alongside all of the things that you've outlined is actually invest in our young people and do it differently. Because if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to get the same result, and we're going to have the disconnect that we have in the labour market right now. What we do at 1 Million Mentors is we provide opportunities for business to connect with local young people, the talent, the abundance of talent that does exist in our communities. And we need to really escalate that and really scale that up and put funding into those connections. Early on, if we can get to young people early on, if we can introduce them to the world of work, if we can expose them to opportunities, guide them, support them, pre-GCSE, to automated jobs, to data, gathering, be comfortable with technology. They are comfortable with digital tools, by the way. Young people aren't fearful of automation, but what they're fearful of is not having the opportunities to go into jobs which are highly skilled, and they're not prepared for that.
Whose role is that, though? Is that the role of local businesses, or should the schools be playing a greater role in that? I mean, do you think the schools are doing enough right now on that front?
That's a good point, and I think schools are doing brilliantly, by the way. I do sort of resist the narrative that we peddle that is all on schools to do everything, look after young people's well-being, educate them, get them jobs ready. What we need is a really scalable effort, a collective effort like we've never seen in the UK before, which is bringing business into schools and supporting young people alongside education, by the way, not as part of the education, alongside a parallel system whereby we are getting young people job ready alongside being educated. And the way we think that can be done is through personalised one-to-one support, businesses actively engaging and supporting young people through mentoring, coaching and so forth.
Okay, Clive, I'm conscious we haven't let you have a chance to speak yet, but before we do, just want to go back to Chris in the audience. If you could share some of your experiences in terms of training and skilling. What's it like at Liberty?
It's basically on-the-job training. Obviously we have apprenticeships for engineering side of things, but the production side is more on-the-job training. It's a good level, and we're thorough to ensure that they're competent before we put them obviously into, because it's a dangerous environment, isn't it, of course.
Thank you. Well, Clive, obviously your business employs an awful lot of young people. When they join you, are they fit for the world of work? I remember one of this country's best-known chief executives more than a decade ago, massive employer, better not say who it was. And I remember him saying to me, when we get people out of school or college, the first thing we have to do is teach them how to read and write and count, because a lot of them can't do it properly. Are things better than that? That was a decade ago, I was told that.
Yeah, things are definitely better than that. I mean, pubs. So we run at Punch Pubs & Co. We run 1,300 community pubs right across the UK. So from the Isle of Skye to the Isle of Scilly, actually. And so our pubs provide a great entry point for young people into the world of work. And it's about personality as much as about technical skills. And our publicans do a fantastic job, I think, at developing people into the world of work. As an industry, we need to do better at making sure that people see it as a career opportunity and a longer-term career opportunity, as opposed to a sort of transient first job. We see people coming into our industry all the time from a very young age, and they can rise as stars and be managing their own businesses actually within 2 or 3 years. It's quite unusual. So, it's important for us, I think, to make sure that we continue to be able to provide those opportunities. And at the minute, things are obviously very difficult. We've got pubs that are struggling to find the staff that we need, and if we're struggling to find them, then I think everybody must be.
Really key point you've touched on there, labour shortages right now. I mean, obviously the hospitality industry had a terrible time during the pandemic. Lots of businesses went under. Where do you go from here? Are you seeing signs of optimism now despite these labour shortages?
Yeah, it's really complicated actually. I mean, it's confusing, and it's not a consistent picture across the country. So there are very different stories actually. So pubs down in the southwest in sort of domestic tourism land have had phenomenal trade through the summer, but there are a number of businesses that have had a really much slower recovery and a much tougher time. Generally speaking, I think we're quite optimistic about the rebound that we've seen in consumer demand. The challenge is in satisfying that demand and the complexity of delivering through the supply chain, through labour, and it's very frustrating actually that in some areas we're not able to keep up with that, and that's a very unusual place for us to be. So fragile, complicated. But actually, the underlying position, I think, is one of optimism. And we've seen the love of people coming back to hospitality and community pubs in particular being really strong. So that we know that in the long term, if we can get all the pieces right along the way, actually, I think that the long-term rebound can look strong.
But obviously, we've got inflation coming through the pipeline. Are you going to be able to absorb? Is that hit going to be on your margins, or are you going to be able to pass that on to customers?
Well, a huge amount of costs are being absorbed right now, and increasingly day by day, that's getting more difficult. And nobody wants to see prices just being passed on to customers. There's, clearly, there's price elasticity, and we've got to deliver great value and quality to our guests in our pubs. So the truth is that costs are being absorbed and margins are getting squeezed. And we need to continue to get the support that we've had from government through the COVID pandemic beyond the current measures that are in place in the longer term, and to have a real transition plan. I thought the tone of the conference last week and the Prime Minister's speech felt quite celebratory, as if COVID is now in the rearview mirror and it's been and gone. That's not how it feels. Kate Nichols, who runs UK Hospitality, I think said that the industry has got some symptoms of long COVID. That's quite a good analogy, because fundamentally we're back up and running, we're out of hospital, we're healthy, we're open, but we've still got some symptoms that are very real. And we need the support from the government for our sector in particular. Extending the VAT cut is really important, because that does help to prevent price increases being passed straight through to the consumer, but also help with beer duty in particular for the hospitality sector and the on-trade sector, and then the business rates reform, which is promised. But we've got a long way until that comes in. We've got some support in place now until March next year, and that needs to be extended as well, because that is a very significant cost for businesses like ours that are bricks and mortar on the high street in towns across the country. So we need a strong transition plan from the government to enable us to get through these symptoms of long COVID, and then I think the future can look bright.
Now, obviously, low pay is a real issue throughout the economy. The Prime Minister's made it very clear it's on his agenda, and we have a question to that end from Tiffany Jackson in the audience. Tiffany, would you like to make yourself known to us?
My work and learning, and how can businesses help facilitate and support this?
Thanks, Tiffany. For those, did you catch that? The question was, how important is it for young people to have a voice in the dialogue around the future of work? I think you're very well placed.
Brilliant question. Absolutely integral for young people to be part of that dialogue. What we know is we have one of the most diverse, most educated labour coming through, young people coming through into the economy. And they're very clear about what they want. They're very clear, you know, they are mobile, they're resilient, they're values-driven. They want businesses that are supporting their well-being. They want ethical leadership. They want, you know, inclusive ideals. They want to work in places where they have good wages, where there is career progression, and where there are good conditions, you know. And I think they have to be part of the solution. But for me, the onus really is on the employers, you know, to be able to change their culture, change their practices, change their recruitment and hiring practices in order to attract this phenomenal talent that is in the UK.
All right, Karen, did you want to jump in?
Yes, and it's such an important point, because if you think about this crisis, lots of us, we've all suffered. But young people have suffered so much, whether it's missing out on school, whether it's missing out on university. It's been really, really difficult. And I think we've got to do everything we can to support young people. And as Alvina said, that what matters, all the surveys show the two things that are more important to young people than other things. One, they passionately care about climate change, sustainability, biodiversity, the environment. Really matters. The next thing is diversity and inclusion. It really matters. I'm the first ethnic minority CBI president in its history. And I've launched an initiative called Change the Race Ratio to champion ethnic minority participation across all business. And lots of big companies have signed up to it. Microsoft, EY, Aviva, Siemens, everyone's in it. It's a fantastic initiative. That's the sort of thing we've got to do. And the other thing is, at schools, we've got to get businesses into schools. If survey after survey has shown, if children are exposed to business through visits from business leaders into schools, they are so much more likely to be employable. Secondly, field visits. If children go and visit businesses, visit factories, it has a huge impact on them. I can still remember my field visits from 11 years old when I went to a pencil factory. It has a big impact. So I think we've got to put young people, make it a very important priority.
All right, Carl, I'm going to come to you in a second, but we have a question on the related issue here from Bob Jeffrey, who's in the audience. Bob, if you'd like to, there he is.
Hi, Bob Jeffrey. I'm the president of Sheffield TUC, the local trades council, or the neighbouring trades council. And given the lack of effective employment protections here in the UK, we relatively come near the bottom of the league of OECD countries for employment protection. How important are trade unions in terms of driving up the quality of jobs?
Thanks, Bob. Who wants to take that? How important are trade unions in driving the quality of jobs?
Well, I'll have a crack at it. I would say that, listen, any mechanism that gives the voice of the employee to the senior levels of the organisation has to be an important element. In Siemens, we have parts of our organisation where they are trade unions are recognised, in others where they're not. And actually it's horses for courses. So I don't think it's the only route for communication. Back to Alvina's point and the question earlier, actually I find the interaction with the employees individually on far more useful than perhaps conglomerated responses. So I would say, yeah, we need to listen to our employees. I mean, we are listening to our employees, and on that topic of training and the voice of individuals, I'm lucky enough to have two children, a 16-year-old daughter and a 19-year-old son who've lived their O-levels and A-levels through the pandemic, and actually, so I agree that it is a group of people who have hugely suffered. Actually, we've embraced technology. We've been doing work experience remotely. And actually, there's quite an interesting challenge for us. As an engineering organisation, we often find it difficult to get to ethnic minorities, to get to a gender balance correctly. Actually, in our online workplace experience, we ended up having 50% female attendees and more than 50% in black and minority ethnics. So actually those new ways of engaging with people have also been something that we're going to continue to do post-pandemic. So there's lots of pain in the pandemic, but there's also lots of things we've learned that have been useful, and we should be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and make sure we embrace and keep embracing those new ways of engaging.
Karen made the point about getting schools into business. Yeah. How have you been able to market engineering and science careers as sexy to school kids?
That's a trick, isn't it? Although I have to say, we might talk about, Karen mentioned about decarbonisation, the biggest global challenge for the world. And who's going to fix it, right? Probably an engineer and a scientist are going to be at the heart of it. That's pretty sexy. So we were involved in the ventilator challenge. So we were involved with a number of other engineering organisations when the call came that there was a concern we weren't going to have enough ventilators. We were making 20 a week. We needed to make 2,000 a week. And within the space of 4 weeks, we'd created a production line. We'd used digital technology to do it. We'd used the knowledge of the experts. We'd taken management and left management at the door to avoid egos, and actually we found a solution, and it was brilliant. And again, unfortunately I've not been able to convince either of my children to go into engineering, but that's because I'm a rubbish salesman. However, I think they starting to see now the value of science and engineering. But of course we need to keep on about it. It's easily forgotten, and yes, we have young people coming into our organisation. We also have a lot of our employees who are engaged with young people. I sit on the Engineering UK board, which is a group of businesses supporting Key Stage 2 and 3. So very early on in getting over this idea that an engineer is somebody who comes home with grit under the fingernails. Now I do that sometimes because I like tinkering in my garage, but actually generally there's lots more that we can do. And actually if we're really at the cornerstone of fixing the future of the planet, I think that's quite a sexy place to be.
Is it time that we started to abandon this target of half the country's college leavers going to university and push more people into apprenticeships?
Only if the apprenticeships work. And I think there's a lot more work we need to do with apprenticeships. But there are lots of different opportunities. And I think picking up what Carl was saying, young people they have had, as you said, Lord Bill-Murray, they have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, the education disruption, the uncertainty around GCSE and A-levels. My children went through the same experience, and it was as hard for them as it was as a parent. But young people now, as the lockdown eases, are feeling a lot more positive, which is really interesting. They're beginning to socialise a bit more, but they're also being able to pick up opportunities that they wouldn't have had pre-pandemic. So the young people that we work with, over 3,000, some of them are now applying for roles because of remote working. They live in the north, but they're applying for roles in the south. And I think that's fantastic, and I think that's really positive in terms of geographical barriers not being as important as they were pre-pandemic, and we need to keep that going. I think young people are beginning to look at opportunities beyond university, and I do think it is important that they do that, because we know what the skills shortage is, we know what future jobs looks like, and therefore it's incumbent on all of us here in this room and across the country to identify and support young people from an early age, pre-GCSE, to find the right career path for them, which doesn't mean university for some.
Are you recognising that, Clive?
Totally. Come to hospitality. We need you, we want you, and it's a great career path for young people. And then I guess my request to the government in terms of working with us to help unlock some of the blockages is to think about the apprentice scheme, think about the Kickstart scheme through the eyes of small business owners. So our pubs are run by independent operators, and we regularly look at these schemes and say, well, why can we not get more traction? Because they're overly bureaucratic and they're complicated, and we need to make everything flow as simply and smoothly as possible. and thinking about each individual small business having to undertake the workload to make these schemes work, which everybody wants.
Did you want to jump in there?
Just on the apprentice topic and this idea that apprenticeship is a second-class, route into. I'm slightly biased here. I left school at 16 and did an apprenticeship. I don't think I did too bad for myself the process that followed. So I think it really is. It's a great grounding. And somebody was talking earlier on about on-the-job training. Actually, on-the-job training is some of the best training that we are actually able to give our youngsters. So these are not negative things. These are really positive things, and you start as an apprentice and you can go far beyond that.
Well, I mean, it's so important. I qualified as a chartered accountant, and you qualify while you're working. I worked at a firm called EY, and it's on-the-job training, and you get a professional qualification. I want to pick up on Bob's point. So important. Throughout this pandemic, my father, I remember, said that the true test of leadership is not in the good times; it's in times of adversity. And this is when business leadership has been really tested. And how businesses have treated their employees will be remembered. Will be remembered by the employees, the ones who were treated badly, the ones who were treated well. And companies having a purpose is so important. And a company with purpose will work very closely with everybody, with the whole family that makes up the employees, the customers, the suppliers, the advisors. They're partners of the same family. If you have that attitude, it works. And what is absolutely awful is if you have bullying of any sort going on. And to your point, trade unions. There was a photograph taken on the steps of number 11 with Rishi Sunak, the Director General of CBI, and the head of the TUC. Side by side, government, unions, business working together. And we helped work the furlough scheme. So much through this pandemic, we've worked closely together, and that's how it should be.
We got a question from the audience. Matt in the audience, I think, wants to ask about... Matt in the audience wants to ask about incentives. Oh, it's Nat, sorry, not Matt. Nat, there you are.
So we saw the data earlier on and it was really interesting, but I think that we can all agree that education and health should be considered as important as our finance sectors. And we shouldn't really accept lower salaries in these areas as a result of that. So surely recruitment, retention and quality could all be improved as a result of increased investment in these areas, but not just from a training and pre-employment perspective, but following on. We need to keep people in these jobs and then ultimately they act as role models for the young people coming through. We don't have to spend as much time trying to recruit at an early age because we've got the role models later on to encourage them to come through.
Who wants to take that? Clive, that sounds like might be one for you.
Well, I'd say the same is true in hospitality, actually. So, our challenge is to keep people and develop their time in hospitality into a long-term career, and we have to work harder as a sector, I think, in achieving that, because it is a meritocracy and it's a flat structure and people can move through it very fast. So. I totally agree, getting people in at entry level and then enabling them to grow and developing their skills on the job, and it is very much on the job training, and we have a good pathway to do that. We need to do it better.
Could I come in as well?
Please do.
I think you're absolutely spot on that. Lifelong learning is incredibly important now. It's not just about entry level, it's throughout, because we know the labour force that's coming through is much more mobile. If we're not going to give them the experience, if we're not going to look after them, if we're not going to ensure that their well-being is priority, then they will leave and will be, the investment is gone. But the point you're making around role models is absolutely important. Relatable people who can support young people in places like Rotherham, where there is generations of worklessness, and say to them, look, we made it, you can make it, this is the way we will support you, and invest and tell those young people that you are important. Is beyond, I think that's a single thing that will address some of the complexities in our labour market. Mentoring is key.
I think the data that you shared at the beginning demonstrates that, doesn't it? We've got role models in tech and these, upcoming innovative careers where individuals are valued as employees, and we're seeing high vacancies and not as much interest in some of the other areas like hospitality and leisure where we haven't got the same amount of role models active.
That's right.
Well, I think the point you're making is that teachers, people in education, nurses, Do they get paid for what they're really worth? I believe they get way, way underpaid. I mean, do you remember the teachers who changed your life? They change our lives, they make our lives, they save our lives, you know. So I believe that we've got to really encourage people to go into those careers, and you follow your passion, not your pension, and what you really love doing. I mean, solicitors now, American firms in the city are paying newly qualified solicitors. I heard yesterday the extreme is £250,000 to somebody in their early 20s, £125,000. That's the disparity that exists.
Yes, I often wonder where I went wrong, really, not pursuing a career in the law. But look, I mean, we're all agreed that education is very, very important. We've got a budget coming up on the 27th of this month. We've had the Institute for Fiscal Studies yesterday, their green budget, and they're making the point that essentially spending on the NHS is crowding out all other areas of public spending, those unprotected areas of government, local government, education, defence, transport, all of those are going to be squeezed. All the money is going to the NHS. Are you comfortable with the way that the NHS almost appears to be a cuckoo in the nest and that all other public spending is being crowded out?
Historically, if you look at overall public spending to GDP, we've tried to get to around 40% of GDP. Now, if you look at the figures during the pandemic, I mean, it's gone way over that. Then you say that's in a time of crisis. Then you say you need more spending on health, which we do. Then you say you need more. One of the things the pandemic has really highlighted is social care, that it's been a neglected sector. I was shocked in April last year, went on a major television program, and the news broke that day that patients were being sent back from hospitals into care homes without being tested. I said, how could this be happening? And then it highlighted how social care has been neglected. So it needs more funding, no question about that. So how do we now, looking forward, give the spending that's required, but also increase the tax take to be able to spend it, to pay for it, but also increase the growth? Because if you have an austerity, high tax, that will stifle growth. That will stifle domestic investment, that will stifle inward investment. We're the second largest recipient of inward investment in the world. If you put up taxes too much, if your spending is out of kill, you will not attract that investment. So we've got to be very careful going ahead. There's no question the investment is required.
Clive, have you run the numbers? How much is this rise in national insurance next year going to cost you?
Painful. But it's not. But it's not just national insurance. It's the cost increases we're seeing on virtually every line of the P&L. So it's the cumulative impact of that. But in terms of the government investment and where the money goes, I would encourage the government to think of it as investment and not as a cost. So particularly, obviously, my world is embedded in pubs and hospitality. By supporting our sector, that is supporting the regeneration of jobs and local economies in hundreds, thousands of every town and village actually across the UK. We are a good conduit to reinvesting in local communities, creating jobs, investing capital into our buildings, into new businesses, and investing in improving our businesses. And we're still at that stage, at this transition stage, where we need that support to be able to help to stimulate the government, the economy recovery, and the levelling up agenda. We're a brilliant route to achieve that. And all of the costs that we are incurring at the minute are just getting in the way of that.
Carl, you must be seeing that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the cost increases have been quite brutal for all sectors. I think it is a difficult challenge for the government as to where they spend the money. I always think of it as they've got to spend it where they think they're going to get the best value from it, and so I think that has to be focused. If you do things sector-wide, you end up spreading lots of money, and I appreciate as government it's very difficult to be narrow, but I think if we could be a little bit more intelligent in our decision-making and make sure that recognising we have got to pay down the debt that we've increased, as a part of COVID, that's not a freebie. Somebody's got to pay for that.
Well, we're never going to pay down the debt.
We'll eventually pay it down, but we won't pay it down completely. You're right, but to pre-pandemic levels is where we should be aiming for. However, I also do think you have to be very careful that it's about growth. It really is about growth, and we need growth in all sectors, not in one or other sector. So this isn't about just engineering or just hospitality or healthcare. It's everywhere, and that's a really difficult challenge challenge to balance, and that's back to this, you attract investment by being productive.
Well, I mean, you as a business, you're going to be hit in a few years' time by a big jump in corporation tax.
Absolutely.
Are you going to get value for money from the government for that, for all these extra taxes that you're going to be paying?
Yeah, great question. It's very difficult to tie those taxes into real value for money. So those are coming. I mean, the only other thing I would say is there are some positive things that have been done. The super deduction, which is a way to get large businesses to invest in technology to drive productivity. Now, I think that was a great lever in last year's budget, but it's too short term because that will fall out just as the corporation tax is going up. So I think there are things that the government can do rather than hitting people with a stick, but actually giving them a carrot to invest can often get the same, if not a better outcome.
May I just quickly add to that? It's a very important point you made. The super deduction, to encourage investment, government can do a lot to incentivize that. Problem is that's going to be taken away at the same time the corporation tax is going up. So our message to government is keep that incentive going. But we as a country underinvest in research and development and innovation. We spend 1.7% of GDP. America, Germany is 2.8%. Israel, 4%. If we spend that extra 1%, that's an extra £20 billion a year. If you imagine the productivity increase, the growth, the employment that's generated out of that increased investment, that's what we should be investing in.
Absolutely, and there is some rumour that target for R&D will actually push out. We spend more than those figures in R&D, but we are a technology and engineering company. We have to invest. I think, again, it's when you're making those tough decisions, be careful not to just look at the here and now, and do have one eye to the long term. And I know that's a really difficult balance, and we all do that in our business life, and the government has to do it at the country level. But fundamentally, it's easy to have a short win. It's easy to make everybody happy now. The goal is not about everybody happy now. It's about that long-term journey.
We have a question from Phil Miller in the audience. Is Phil here? Good to see you, sir.
Yeah. My question is that obviously since COVID and everything, it's pretty tight for money in businesses. And obviously we're looking to get to net zero. What are the chances of the government giving a low-cost loan to help the green infrastructure?
Thanks, Phil. Did everyone catch that? Who wants to have a tackle at that? You're champing at the bit, Carl.
I'll have a bit of a go of it. And I think low-cost loans. I think what government, first of all, the challenge for decarbonisation for this country is huge. People just don't get the scale of the challenge in front of us. We did a piece of work to just look at the Northwest and said, if you were going to get that to net zero by 2050, you're going to have to invest £200 billion. Okay, that's just one area of the country. Now, on a positive note, that 200 billion is not necessarily have to be public money. In fact, it shouldn't be. And the model we need to look at is offshore wind, where the government set long-term policy. It set some seed funding, so it did provide some incentive for people to invest. And that created a market that then attracted huge amounts of investment, both UK and international investment. And actually, then we saw the price of offshore energy drop. So there's a really good model. So we know how to make decarbonisation work. I would just caveat with a couple of things and said, I think as a country, we've done a lot. So I get the opportunity to speak to my colleagues across the world, and I do think we are leading the charge on decarbonisation. We don't always get it right, but I think we're leading the charge. What we've done so far is about fixing the big centralised stuff like power generation. I think the next things around heat, homes, buildings and transport are all local topics. And I think that is another challenge. And I know your panel this afternoon is around levelling up, but as a lad from Rochdale, with most of our facilities based in the north of England, I'm pretty passionate about this topic. And I think there is a role for the regions to take in levelling up. And I've seen that in some regions like Manchester and Liverpool where they've coordinated themselves, and now the government need to devolve more powers to those. There are some regions that are not quite so well coordinated, right? So there are some regions that need to organise themselves to get the benefit from it. And I think if they are able to do that, the transport challenge, the heat challenge, they are local challenges. They will generate local jobs for local people at very good levels. And actually, if we create markets, there is more than enough investment globally to do that. The government need to create stable policy and to provide a little bit of seed funding to get the whole thing started.
Thanks, Carl. It's taken us 40 minutes, but we finally had the expression levelling up.
Oh, did I say
For the first time. Bingo. Someone will have a card out there. What do you understand by the term levelling up? Is it just a bit of empty rhetoric, or is there actually something behind it, in your view?
I think it's absolutely essential. I think we need to be in a position where every person in this country has the opportunity to access the jobs that are available across the UK. So it needs to be more than just talk, it needs to be action. I think we are in a position now to rethink and reset. The pandemic has provided us opportunities to recalibrate and to think through, how do we actually make things happen, like levelling up? How do we get every young person in this country into jobs that are available, and there are many jobs that are available. And to do that, it cannot be the situation now that the only way young people can get jobs is through personal connections. It has to be open to every single person. And the way to do that is what we've been talking about today, is about ensuring that business gets into schools alongside education and exposes these young people to work, becomes the trusted adult that identifies career opportunities. And actually, I talk about young people because that's my job, but actually there's a huge amount to do with the over 50s as well. Mentoring should be a sort of tool to enable labour market to become much more fluid. And I think levelling up is essential, really.
Really good point there about older workers. I mean, we keep being told by the government that it's desirable for some people to change careers mid-track. But I mean, do you see it in your business, Clive? Do you see people over the age of 50 saying, I've had a Damascene moment and I want to go and pull pints?
Coming into the industry at an older age, not so much. Probably something we should be trying to attract, actually. We don't care how old people are or where they come from. We want them to have a personality and a great work ethic and a passion for hospitality. So not particularly. Our issue is that we over-index on younger workers, which is great. We under-index on older workers. So, that's a good idea in a campaign for people of my age and older to come into hospitality.
If this goes badly, I might end up doing it again. I used to do it. I used to pull pints on the Red Lion in Withington in Manchester. Great man. Look, we talked about reskilling. We talked about some of the supply chain issues that you're facing, labour shortages. The elephant in the room really is the economic backdrop, potentially a rise in interest rates around the table. The money markets are pricing in at least a couple by this time next year. How much of a threat is that going to be to this nascent recovery that we're seeing?
So just before I answer that, if I may just pick up a comment, very important point about this levelling up in Albina. It's prosperity throughout all the regions. And it should not be at the expense of London. It should be London prospering benefits the whole country, but it's London and the rest of the country. And when it comes to climate change, heat is such a big issue that we don't address. I chaired the Heat Commission. 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions comes from heat. Half of that comes from buildings. And out of the 29 homes in this country, 29 million homes in this country, only 1 million are up to the standard if we're to reach net zero by 2050. That means upgrading 28 million homes. The cost of that, the jobs that are created to skill and implement that, the body that needs to be created. We've got the National Centre for Decarbonisation of Heat in the West Midlands that could do this throughout the country. It's a huge challenge, and we've got to face it. We've got COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference. This is where Britain can show global leadership on the stage.
Well, we're all about big ideas, and I think you've just come up with a big idea for jobs there.
And if I can just add, what gives me confidence that how we'll get there and how it will be funded, I have no idea. But what I do know is that I have absolute confidence and excitement about the younger age group. Our consumer of tomorrow or today will demand these things. Yeah. So they won't be coming into our pubs if they don't meet, the criteria. And that actually gives me the confidence. From an employee workforce point of view, they won't want to work for us. Our consumers won't want to be coming in. So these changes absolutely will come through. We have to find a way of funding them effectively.
Back to this point on interest rates, so guys, how are you going to trade through this?
I mean, I think from my perspective, the interest rate is perhaps not a direct challenge, but it impacts markets and it impacts confidence. And anything that does that, and perhaps Karen mentioned before, just how fragile the recovery is, and I will say it really is fragile. We're on a knife edge. I'm ever the optimist, right? I'm convinced we will come out well, but I have to say that any dints to the confidence of public investing on hospitality markets, for example, or major investments in national infrastructure, anything that stops people doing that, and we may find ourselves the positive. You know, it was mentioned the other day that our recovery is the highest in performance of our economy since the recovery of COVID is the highest in G7. That's great. That's a great position, but we need to keep it there. And anything that dents confidence is a worry.
To answer your question as well, Geeta Gopinath, the chief economist of the IMF, in May, when I chaired the B7 before the G7, she said, you're going to have a great recovery in this country. You've invested £400 billion to save your economy. You've got a vaccination program that's world leading. You'll have a V-shaped bounce back recovery. What's happened since May and now? All these challenges. You've got taxes going up. You've got the energy crisis. You've got the fuel crisis. You've got inflation. Now, the inflation is meant to be temporary, but now there's talk that this inflation, which is meant to be 4.5%, might go up to 6%, 7%. Yeah. If that inflation persists, the government will have, the Bank will have no option but to put up interest rates.
Absolutely.
You put up interest rates by 1%, the cost of government borrowing goes up by £26 billion. Mortgages go up, consumers suffer, businesses suffer, investment is affected. So this is a very serious situation. We've got to watch it very carefully. And that's why I keep saying to the government, work with business. We've got to try and work through this and generate that growth, generate the jobs, so we can get through this together and have a resilient, sustainable recovery.
I mean, Clive, you're in a consumer-facing business. Next year, April next year, everyone in this room possibly, everyone on PAYE, they're going to have the experience of looking at their salary notification and it'll be less than the month before. That's a big thing. That hasn't happened to many people in this country for decades. It's going to have a real impact on consumer psychology, isn't it?
Yeah, and people talk about consumer confidence being important in a recovery. Actually, you know, we live in the here and now. I think, you know, pubs are a great litmus test actually for how the country has performed that week. And the disposable income that people have in their pockets, a lot of that goes on their leisure spend and for a lot of people in their community pub. So it's a very real threat to us. It's something that is very much in the here and now, not just for next March and April. And we're absorbing costs left, right, and centre, and so are our businesses and our customers. It's very real, and that's why we need the support to have a longer-term transition plan to prevent such a lumpy recovery and to try and build a smooth platform from where we are now.
Yeah, tough time for you guys. Really, I feel for you. I really do. We're about to come to the conclusion of this, but we've had a lot of interesting points made by our panellists, and certainly one big idea from Karen Villamoria there, for which many thanks. We're now going to hear a little from our data and economics editor, Ed Conway, about what he's going to be talking about in just a few moments.
Hi, Ian, and hello, everyone. I mean, such an interesting panel, so many different issues that are kind of vying with each other for our attention at the moment, and hopefully I'll be taking some of those issues and trying to make a bit of sense of them. I mean, often when it comes to, what we do in our coverage, we're trying to explain and simplify what's happening right now, but it's hard to think of another time when there's been so much complexity and so many different dynamics happening beneath the surface, all of which we're starting to notice now, whether it's us just kind of watching it or indeed businesses and executives taking part in it. So we'll be going through some of that. We'll be looking through some of the numbers. I mean, it's very difficult for me to be in front of a big screen like this without having a chart behind me. So we'll have lots of charts and lots of data, but also try to kind of underline some of the points you've been hearing about and some of the stuff we'll be hearing about later on today, because we've got some other really interesting guests yet to come in. So lots more interesting stuff yet to come.
Ed, what do you make of what you've heard about the potential for an interest rate rise?
I mean, it's really interesting the extent to which central banks, every time there's been an inflation scare going back to the 1970s or indeed before that, basically they have missed it. You know, conventional economics has failed to forecast inflation ahead of it actually happening. And if you look back at what the Bank of England was saying only earlier on this year, inflation was going to go to maybe 2%. It went way above that. It was going to go to 3%. It went way above that. It's maybe now they think it's going to go to 4%. So, I mean, if you read between the lines, you know, they've been behind the curve a lot, you know, previously. It's not impossible that they might be behind the curve this time around as well. So it's not impossible. No, you know, markets aren't quite there yet, but, you know, there could even be one this year. We'll have to wait and see.
And worth pointing out that a lot of central banks around the world are already raising interest rates. Poland just the other day, New Zealand, Sri Lanka. I think the Russians have raised interest rates 5 times this year, so it's happening in some parts of the world.
It's happening, and you know, when you look at inflation, it's clear that prices are rising. We're seeing this coming through the pipeline right now. I mean, you know, I'm sure many in the audience and here on the panel will have seen that as well. And just trying to work out, I don't want to give away all of what I'm talking about later, but trying to work out what's coming down the path towards us is, I think, going to be one of the biggest challenges that, you know, we within journalism, but also within business are going to face in the coming years, because, you know, this is going to be a volatile world we're living in at the moment.
Ed, thanks for that. Quick word of thanks to our panellists, Clive, Carl, Arvina, Karen. Thank you all very much for your contributions. That is it from this special Ian King Live, part of the Big Ideas Live today here on Sky News. You can follow Ed's presentation next by going to our live stream online. And we'll be back on Sky News at 11:30 when the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, will be speaking to us about the challenges facing the world and UK economies and the promise of COP26. But that is it for now. Thank you very much indeed.